time. This year, they'll own the American League East. The Indians have long had good hitting. Last year, they scored 831 runs, high for the American League, but they suffered from pitching, giving up even more runs, or 841 to be exact. But not this time, folks. The Indians added Steve Carlton to their already beefed-up bullpen last Friday, and now they're hunting for Bear. No longer will the tribe be known as the Mistake by the Lake. Now they're the Goons by the Lagoon. So watch out, baseball. The Cleveland Indians are on the warpath. So that's my viewpoint, but you can follow your team right here on ESPN. And I'm Jeff Joseph for Nation's Business Today.
And coming up, a debate on the need for advance warning about plant closings. Also, today's top national and international news stories. You are watching Nation's Business Today on ESPN. Today is Monday, April 6th. It is 12 minutes before the hour.
More companies are weathering labor disputes by staying in business and not shutting down when they are hit by strikes. The Chicago-based labor consulting firm of Emberman and DeForest says 40% of the companies surrounded by picket lines stay in operation. 15 years ago, only 5 to 10% would have stayed open. Emberman and DeForest say that the reason for the change is the widespread perception of an erosion of the power once held by labor unions. And part of becoming more competitive for American industry has involved some plant closings, and that has become a very emotional issue.
Well, Carl, there are also economic and some serious social dislocations. American workers have worked to become more competitive, but those efforts have caused some strife. Plant closings may be an economic necessity in some cases, but there have also been questions raised about the manner in which closings are announced. Whether the blow can be softened was the focus of this week's It's Your Business program.
In most cases, the employer does not give notice. The average blue-collar worker gets 2 days' notice if he's not a member of a union. If he's a member of a union, very often, of course, he has protection under his contract. But the fact is, when that happens, when workers are thrown out of jobs without adequate notice, they end up unemployed for long periods, and when they do get a job, they end up at much lower levels of pay.
Meryl, Lane misrepresented something early in the show. The Department of Labor Task Force said good things about voluntary notification, but it stayed away from asking for a national bill to require notification. You made it sound like it was quite the opposite. That's not the case.
They did indicate it was absolutely essential, though, that for communities and workers to make the transition, that some kind of advance notification be given. In communities such as my own, where we've witnessed several plant closings, we've had both a voluntary notice from places like Caterpillar, which have helped us ease that transition, but we've had other businesses that have closed off.
I say to you again, that task force, which had union representation and Democrats and Republicans, did not call for a new law to require early notification.
But there is a very big difference between requiring it or suggesting it and having a federal law making it mandatory to do it. That would make it absolutely disruptible to the business community, and I would suggest that also means that workers themselves are going to lose jobs as a result of making it federal mandatory because some abuse it.
An important part of both the House and Senate bill is job training, counseling, and relocation assistance. A new $900 million adjustment assistance program is under consideration.
Topping the list of news stories that we're following at this hour, federal safety investigators are trying to find out why a New York State Thruway bridge collapsed just hours after it was declared safe. All 4 lanes of the Thruway fell 80 feet into flooding waters below. At least 3 cars and a tractor trailer were on the 200-foot span when the pilings beneath it gave way. Governor Mario Cuomo has called for his own investigation into the bridge disaster. One body has been recovered, but rescue experts on the scene doubt there were any more survivors. The cab of the truck has been located, but rescuers say the rapid current makes attempts to reach the cab impossible.
A sightseeing tour turned into tragedy for 66 passengers on a double-decker bus near Mount Vernon outside Washington. A Spirit of 77 bus lost its top going under an overpass at a high rate of speed. One woman was killed. At least 33 other people were injured. Federal safety investigators are still on the scene. A preliminary report suggests the driver failed to change lanes to the center lane, where the clearance was much higher. Well, take me out to the ball game if you can stand it.
Well, that's a real challenge. Well, it is a big day in sports for a couple of reasons. Major League Baseball season officially opens in parks around the country. But tonight, most of the attention will be focused on the battle in Las Vegas between Marvelin Marvin Hagler and Sugar Ray Leonard for the middleweight boxing championship of the world. On Sunday, the first major tournament of the LPGA got underway. Betsy King emerged the victor in a sudden death playoff with Patsy Sheehan. On the final hole of the regulation play, Sheehan had a chance to win it all, but her birdie effort failed to find the hole, leaving her frustrated and in disbelief. And then on the second hole of the playoff, King sank a short putt to walk away with the winner's check, and it amounted to $80,000. Now, let's take a look at the rest of the results from the world of sports on the Nation's Business Today scoreboard.
This morning's top business news stories are coming up next. You are watching Nation's Business Today on ESPN. It is 3 minutes before the hour. Coming this half hour, we'll hear from Labor Secretary Brock on why the government is moving to change the federal pension system. A few pointers on how to prepare for your retirement years. And the first part of our week-long profile on Bell South Chairman John Clendenin. We now return to the Nation's Business Today anchor desk for Carl Grant and Meryl Comer.
This week in Washington, bankers and diplomats will mingle to discuss the Latin debt problem and the skittish dollar. It is time once again for the annual World Bank and International Monetary Fund meeting. The group of 24 developing nations meets today. On Wednesday, the group of 5 industrial nations will gather to talk about trade and currency rates. The Japanese finance minister and a Bank of Japan governor will meet with Secretary Baker on Tuesday. Well, from the administration's point of view, when it comes to trade, they're not just talking.
No, well, they are talking. They're talking tough, and they hope this will help them with the upcoming negotiations. President Reagan's top economic advisor says the decision to impose trade sanctions against Japan demonstrates that the United States is no paper tiger when it comes to international economics. Earl Sprinkle, who is chairman of the Council of Economic Advisors, says the country's massive trade deficit cannot be solved simply by driving down the value of the dollar on world markets. The trade sanctions, which will double the tariffs on several categories of Japanese products, are scheduled to take effect April 17th. And Japanese officials are scheduled to arrive in Washington for talks this week, and Sprinkle says there will probably be negotiations on the sanctions, but he says President Reagan took the right action and there will be no changing that decision.
Carl, the administration's push to sell off government assets has reaped its first big dividend, and that's a $1.5 billion check to the U.S. Treasury from the sale of Conrail. That represents the proceeds from the initial public offering of Conrail stock on the New York Stock Exchange. Although it was the largest public offering in Wall Street history, it fell short of the $1.7 billion goal set by Congress last year in legislation authorizing the sale of the freight line. The money will go to help reduce the federal deficit. The government has owned Conrail for 10 years. Consolidated Rail was forged out of the ashes of the bankrupt Penn Central Rail and several smaller lines in an effort to maintain freight service in the Midwest and Northeast.
Some changes are expected this year in rules governing corporate pension plans. The Federal Pension Benefit Guaranty Corporation, stung by a wave of defaults by bankrupt companies, is poised to ask Congress to increase insurance premiums paid by pension funds. And Labor Secretary William Brock told Nation's Business Today that the Reagan administration will propose legislation requiring many companies to increase funding for their pension plans.
Frankly, we're going to have to do some changes in the bankruptcy law to make it a little less easy for companies to simply get a federal bailout by dumping their obligations to their own workers on the backs of the taxpayers. Some companies have been doing that, and that's unacceptable.
Secretary Brock says the majority of private pension plans are solvent and well-run, but he says those plans are being forced to pay higher insurance premiums to support pension funds which are poorly managed.
After holding steady at 6.7% since December, the nation's civilian unemployment rate dropped a 1/10 of a percentage point in March. That's the lowest figure in 7 years as more and more people found jobs in the service sector and in particular the health field. Employment in manufacturing fell again during the month, but the number of people looking for work also fell, down 113,000. The Labor Department now figures that about 110 million people are working in the United States.
Pilots at United Airlines are offering to buy the nation's largest air carrier. The bid comes amid speculation that other investors are interested in buying parts of UAL Incorporated, which also owns the Hertz Rental Car Company, Westin Hotels, and Hilton International. The pilot's bid is for $4.5 billion. United says it won't respond to the proposal until it has a chance to check out the offer. The offer from the pilots is the first on-the-record offer for any parts of the company. United stock has traded heavily in the last few weeks, leading to rumors that a takeover attempt was imminent. United is the largest single airline in the nation, but is smaller than the combination of Texas Air Corporation's Continental and Eastern Airlines. Well, if anybody's traveling on any of the airlines, they're going to have a surprise in some parts of the country.
Now, watch the weather. Let's take a look at the weather forecast throughout tomorrow morning to see what's happening in your area.
People in the central Appalachians are beginning to dig out from a mammoth storm that dumped up to 3 feet of snow in some places of North Carolina, and it brought snow and a deep freeze to Georgia, wiping out much of this year's peach crop. The foul weather is also blamed for a bridge collapse in New York State and flooding from Connecticut up to Maine. Traveler advisories are out this morning for the mountains of Virginia, West Virginia, and North Carolina, and the wet weather is likely to continue. More rain is forecast from Virginia to Maine. A cold rain will fall in Texas. There will be rain and snow in Colorado. Rain is also predicted for the Northwest. For tomorrow, rain continues in South Texas, in the northeastern states, and in the Northwest. The jet stream is influenced by a low-pressure system over eastern Maryland, bringing cool weather to the middle Atlantic states and the Northeast. Now for a look at how the weather is shaping up for our major cities across the nation. Coming next, Larry Butler with the Investors Report. You were watching Nation's Business Today on ESPN. It's coming up on 6 minutes after the hour.
This portion of Nation's Business Today is brought to you by Data General for computer systems that put you a generation ahead.
Investors Report, brought to you by Nuveen, tax-free investments. It's not what you earn, it's what you keep.
Wall Street went on a wild and woolly ride during the latest trading week. Things started off with a 54-point slide for the Dow Industrial Average. The week closed with the largest point gain ever. And here with details is Nation's Business Today financial correspondent Larry Butler with Investors Report. Larry, isn't it fun to just try to figure out what's going on Wall Street?
I'll tell you, the volatility up and down like a yo-yo, this is an exciting place to be. I mean, I didn't have so much fun since I left the Las Vegas slot machines. Sometimes market rallies are not all they're cracked up to be. While the Dow Industrials were having a party, the rest of the market activity was quite unemotional. This non-confirmation of the rally by over-the-counter stocks, utilities, and some other sectors leads some market reporters, including this one, to believe that we've really hastened the cycle, bringing us to the point of a correction. Friday's explosion was fueled by a lot of sideline cash, resulting in part from IRA and Keogh funds and short covering and Japanese getting into the market. The shorts didn't want to get caught in the stampede. If the market seemed overbought a week ago, it's even more so today. Look for some heavy selective profit-taking among the blue chips today and this week. Overall, the Dow Jones Industrial Average added 54.5 points for the week to close at 2390.34. The New York Stock Exchange Index moved up 1 3/4 points to 170.20. The American Exchange Index advanced 2 1/3 points, closing at 340.46. Over-the-counter issues gained 1/2 point to 437.36. On the New York Stock Exchange, IBM led the most actives, down 1 1/4. Investors were apparently not impressed with Big Blue's new line of personal computers. AT&T came next, up 3/8, followed by USX, up 1 3/8. On the American Exchange, Wix companies led the most actives, up 1/4. Next came Texas Air, rising 3 1/4, followed by Western Digital, up 1 point. The dollar was slightly higher in cautious trading. It made gains against most European currencies, but lost ground against the Japanese yen, amid reports of Federal Reserve intervention. Gold was $1.75 higher in New York trading. Silver gained 9 cents. Among commodities, cotton futures were lower. Cocoa futures were narrowly mixed. Coffee, orange juice, and world sugar futures were more broadly mixed. And that's today's Investors Report.
Tax shelters are going. Capital gains breaks are gone. Most deductibles aren't deductible anymore. The hard fact is, under the new tax law, I'm going to be paying even more. I need tax-free income more than ever, so I'm investing in Nuveen. Nuveen puts more money in my pocket. Nuveen, it's not what you earn, it's what you keep.
For information on Nuveen tax-free income, call your investment broker or advisor or 800-228-5333.
Most of us work a lifetime in anticipation of retiring. We hire advisors to develop financial strategies so that we can build a sizable nest egg to fall back on. Yet there are other details that have to be considered to prepare. On this week's segment of Medical Digest, Dr. Tom Bowles of George Washington University has some timely suggestions on how to be ready for the golden years.
Many people who consider retirement are threatened by the prospect of boredom and aging. Most of us have worked our entire adult life, and our daily routine is centered around our jobs. But with some preparation, retirement can be a very happy time, particularly for those who enjoy reasonable health and adequate financial support. Among important considerations for retirement are the following. Maintain a compelling intellectual interest. It doesn't much matter what that interest is, but you should tax your memory and your reasoning ability every day to keep your brain as functional as your health allows. Keep up or begin a regular exercise routine. Your physical health would depend on continuing use of your body as much as you can. You may actually have more time for walking or favorite sports or other physical activity. With some accommodations to age, you can participate in vigorous physical activity for years after retirement. Maintain personal relationships with friends and professional colleagues of all ages as much as possible. These kinds of associations are stimulating and healthy and will add a fulfilling dimension to your daily routine. Finally, don't be afraid to take on new tasks and hobbies. Learning something new is fun and confidence building, and we're never too old to learn. Most people spend their working lives wishing they had more time to read or fish or play golf. Well, here's your chance. Go for it. For Medical Digest, I'm Dr. Tom Bowles of the George Washington University Medical Center.
Next week on Medical Digest, Dr. Bowles looks at traveling and some of the medical problems you might face while away from home.
General Motors is recalling 160,000 of its cars and trucks to correct 3 separate safety problems. About 65,000 1987 Chevrolet Cavaliers equipped with 2-liter Engines are involved because of a problem with an accelerator cable. About 9,000 Chevrolet and GMC C7 and C70 model medium-duty trucks have a problem with the mounting brackets for the power steering unit. And 86,000 Chevrolet and GMC C30 and C35 light-duty trucks are being recalled because they do not meet a federal safety standard for fuel system crashes. The National Highway Traffic Safety Administration says it has received no reports of accidents or injuries caused by these conditions, but urged consumers to have the work done as soon as possible. In another recall involving American Motors, about 20,000 1987 model Jeeps and six-cylinder engines will be checked over for a problem with the fuel valve. And coming up next on Nation's Business Today on CEO Close-Up, Bell South Chairman John Clendenin talks about the fallout from the breakup of Ma Bell.
And the latest market news from abroad on International Business Line. All that and more when we continue.
And in the next hour of Nation's Business Today, cut rate incentives spark sales for the nation's domestic automakers. We'll have the story. We'll have a status report on the course of trade reform legislation in the 100th Congress, and a debate on what can be done to soften the impact of plant closings across the nation. This is Nation's Business Today on ESPN, 14 minutes after the hour.
Four years ago, on January 1st, 1983, the American Telephone and Telegraph System, or Ma Bell, as it had been known for 107 years, went out of business. To take its place, the court ordered a restructuring of the industry. The new AT&T was reorganized to handle long-distance calls, and local service was divided among 7 regional companies, the Baby Bells. Now, today on CEO Close-Up, John Clendenin, chairman and CEO of Bell South, answers the perception that telephone service has suffered since the breakup.
I think the perception in the minds of a lot of our customers is driven by some confusion that didn't used to exist, but was caused when the customer had to start making choices. When we take technical measurements of the quality of our service today, in every case, it's higher than it was prior to the breakup.
AT&T, since the breakup, has had unprecedented layoffs and some other kinds of problems. It appears that Ma Bell is a little bit ill. The Baby Bells seem to be doing very well. Is that a correct perception?
I don't think so. I think that what you have is a mixed situation. The long-distance side of AT&T, I think, has done remarkably well. I think that they have still something slightly in excess of 80% market share in this country, and that's remarkable in many, many ways. On the manufacturing side, I think AT&T, and this is my own opinion, and AT&T may not share it, but I think AT&T underestimated the degree of competition that they were going to face, and I think they made some strategic mistakes in trying to be everything to everybody.
How has the phone user benefited from the breakup of Ma Bell in January '84?
I guess the short answer to that is greater choices.
Are there further changes that you would like to see in the foreseeable future?
Well, there's one area of change that we most assuredly would like to see, and that is that at the time of the divestiture decision, the court identified certain areas from which the regional telephone companies like Bell South were to be restricted. We were not permitted to be in any way involved in the manufacturing process. We were not permitted in the long-distance business, and we were precluded from offering information services. The court set up a procedure whereby at the end of 3 years it would attempt to evaluate the competitive evolution that had taken place and make a judgment as to whether or not those restrictions continued to make the same sense that that they had seemed to make originally. My hope, our hope as a corporation, and I think the hope of the other regional companies, is that these restrictions will be relaxed.
I believe that AT&T thinks that if those restrictions are removed, in essence, the same sort of situation that existed before would be created once again. Is that true or false?
I don't see that there's any valid reason to think that a replication of the old Bell system will ever occur again. On the contrary, I think that what you would see is 7 large companies entering into vigorous competition in the market, and I think the customers would benefit.
Tomorrow on CEO Close-Up, John Clendenin describes how Bell South has become the 7th largest company in the United States and 17th in the world.
Now, once again, here are the top news stories we're following for you this morning. Harsh, wet weather and floods claimed the lives of several victims over the weekend. Near Albany, New York, a bridge on the New York Thruway collapsed, plunging at least 3 cars and a tractor-trailer into flooding water below. The body of one of the victims has been pulled from the water, but rescuers say they doubt there are any more survivors. Just hours before the collapse, highway officials considered closing the bridge. Federal and state safety experts are investigating the tragedy. In Wayne, New Jersey, the waters have risen again, driving thousands from their home. No one has been reported missing, but there is bitterness among many of the residents about unfinished plans to build a dam system to stop the annual flooding.
I would like to see the politicians live over there. Those one on the city council, they stop the dredging, the river dredging. They are the criminals.
In Latin America, hundreds are feared dead in the mountains of Ecuador. A mudslide swept at least 5 buses and an unknown number of cars and people off the mountain roads of southern Ecuador. Miles of road simply disappeared. While soldiers sifted through the mud for bodies, the lowlands were flooded by the heavy rains.
The Soviets have suffered a setback in space. The docking of the newly installed Soviet research module with the manned space station had to be aborted. Space officials say the docking attempt failed because of a problem with the module's directional system. There's no word on when the cosmonauts will try the procedure again.
Pope John Paul II celebrated Mass at a racetrack beside a slum in the southern Chilean city of Concepcion. The Pope prayed for national reconciliation. His visit to Chile was marked by scattered violence between the police and protesters, but his Sunday service was, for the most part, peaceful. The Pope has spoken out against political injustice in Chile, and local church authorities have been pointing the finger of blame at President Augusto Pinochet for human rights violations.
In the next hour, this morning's top business and financial news stories. You are watching Nation's Business Today on ESPN. Today is Monday, the 6th day of April. It's coming up on 23 minutes after the hour.
If you own or manage a growing business, you know how much work goes on behind the scenes, unobserved by your customers, but critical to your success. Here at Nation's Business Today, our staff works to bring you the right blend of information for people who mean business. And you can learn even more about business trends, management techniques, and how to make a business work by reading Nation's Business Magazine, the largest circulation business magazine in America.
Call 1-800-652-7777. 12 big issues of Nation's Business for only $15.97. Business insight, information, and the inspiration you need to be successful. By ordering now, you will also receive the best of Nation's Business, plus the big 75th anniversary issue, all for just $15.97.
So call us now at 1-800-652-7777 and put Nation's Business to work for you.
International Business Line, brought to you by ANA, All Nippon Airways, flying non-stop to Tokyo from Los Angeles and Washington, D.C.
The British are laying plans to strike back at the Japanese on the trade war front. Nation's Business Today financial correspondent Larry Butler is here with that story on today's International Business Line. Larry?
Good morning. British trade officials have emerged from meetings this weekend in Brussels and London with a new trade battle plan. The British will impose heavy sanctions against telecommunications equipment from Japan. Those sanctions will go into effect if the Japanese don't allow the British firm Cable and Wireless to compete with the NTT for domestic phone customers in Japan. For news now and what the markets are doing so far this morning overseas, here are Nation's Business Today correspondents John McElbride in London and Jeffrey Hammerly in Tokyo.
In London this morning, the dollar is up slightly in a very quiet market as dealers await the outcome of this week's G7 and IMF meetings. The dollar is, though, being supported by the latest NAPM survey, which shows an increase and has provided fresh optimism about the future of the U.S. economy. Sterling's also up this morning, with the market citing the weekend opinion polls, which give Mrs. Thatcher's ruling Conservative Party a clear lead. There's much speculation, though, about the date of the next election. The possibility of May the 7th is fading, and it looks more likely to take place in June. In London, John McElvide, Nation's Business Today.
Share prices on the Tokyo Stock Exchange slumped Monday after yet another record-breaking day Saturday. The Nikkei average of 225 selected issues, a 327.82 yen winner Saturday, shed 152.56 yen in the week's first session to close at 22,586.11. Volume was estimated at 1.8 billion shares. And on Tokyo's foreign exchange market, there was little change in the U.S. dollar, which closed down 0.5 yen to 146 yen exactly. Jeffrey Hammerly in Tokyo for Nation's Business Today.
Also in Tokyo, the Ministry of International Trade and Industry has announced an ambitious long-range program to subsidize development of new industries. Over a span of several years, the government will spend $20 billion on a growing list of projects that numbers 50 so far. Most of these projects are in electronics. That's it for today's International Business Line.
The next time you plan a trip to Japan, remember this. ANA flies non-stop to Tokyo from Los Angeles and Washington, D.C.
We're flying your way.
Coming up in the next hour of Nation's Business Today, the latest on President Reagan's trade talks with the Canadian Prime Minister Mulroney.
And an update on the progress of trade reform legislation in the 100th Congress.
All that and more coming up.
And also in the next hour on Money Matters, why it makes fiscal and emotional sense to prepare a will now. You are watching Nation's Business Today on ESPN. This morning's top business news stories are coming up next. It is 28 minutes after the hour. Live from the nation's capital, you are watching Nation's Business Today on ESPN. Trade and acid rain are at the top of the agenda as President Reagan and Prime Minister Mulroney meet in Canada. And cut rate incentives do the trick and send domestic automakers' sales back up. We now return to the Nation's Business Today anchor desk for Meryl Comer and Carl Grant.
The nation's automakers are finding out that it does pay to be persistent. New car sales jumped 5% in March as industry giant General Motors posted its first gain in sales this year during the final 10-day selling period of the month. Auto analysts are saying that the industry's buyer incentive programs are finally beginning to produce results. The 8 domestic companies sold just over 682,000 cars in the United States last month, or about 26,000 cars a day. GM, which has turned in poor sales performances this year, reported a 5% sales decline for the month compared to March a year ago, but in the final 10 days, sales jumped 7%. For Ford, sales for the month were up 18%, and Chrysler's sales jumped 6%. Well, at first it appeared to be a tremendous merger idea between Chrysler and AMC, but now there may be a problem.
Well, Carl, there may be a legal snag in the proposed AMC-Chrysler merger, with Chrysler making familiar sounds about undervalued stock. Regular AMC shareholders will be paid $4 a share for their stock, but part owner Renault will be paid $7 per share for its large stake in the company. That has prompted several AMC shareholders to approach attorney Gary Eisenberg, who talked with reporter Mary Feldman in Detroit.
What I'm doing is looking at it from a lawyer's eye as to whether or not there exists any legal grounds in which to pursue a lawsuit. It may take the filing of the lawsuit to do a little bit of discovery, to get into some of the inner workings of the company, some of the memos, some of the things that are not necessarily made public to the, to the shareholders.
Congress is scheduled to begin looking into the proposed merger during hearings later this spring.
President Reagan and Canadian Prime Minister Brian Mulroney get down to business today, the second day of a summit on trade. And as we hear from Nation's Business Today correspondent Paul Westpheling, the two have a long list of items on their agenda.
Canada is America's largest trading partner, and the talks will certainly center on trade. But they'll also involve acid rain, which is badly damaging the environment, both in the northeastern part of this country and in Canada. Mulroney beginning the meetings by urging Mr. Reagan to increase U.S. actions to curb it. Mulroney said he would like the two countries to come to terms on a treaty that would eliminate 50% of the acid rain emissions by 1994.
Look, we're killing our common environment. And that, to me, is something that is completely unacceptable. The least we should be able to do for our children is to pass on a legacy of an unsullied environment.
Although the two leaders are expected to discuss trade, most observers do not expect any new agreement to ease trade tensions. Mulroney saying he seeks a liberalized trade agreement with the United States, an opportunity, he says, for both countries to enrich themselves. However, trade talks continue to dominate Congress, with much of the resentment focusing on the Japanese. Senator Ernest Hollings of South Carolina says he wants to upgrade technology programs to provide better services for American exporters.
We need at the government level in the Department of Commerce to resolve our Bureau of Standards into an Institute of Technology, put in the regional centers on the one hand, and otherwise put in the financing, the awards to small business and otherwise for the commercialization of technology.
Hollings is chairman of the Senate Commerce, Science, and Transportation Committee. Paul Westpheling, Nation's Business Today.
While President Reagan and his Canadian counterpart discussed trade relations between two friendly but oft-times feuding trading partners, Congress is preparing to get tough with those nations that have major trade imbalances with the United States. First on that list is Japan. Nation's Business Today correspondent Dan Cush reports.
The 100th Congress may well go down in the history books as the Congress which passed the most important trade legislation since World War II. As the House prepares to consider its omnibus trade bill in late April, many members, like Rhode Island's Claudine Schneider, are impressed with the quality of this year's trade debate.
The Congress is not now in as much of a protectionist mood as they were last year. And I think the reason is that they have had more opportunity to see that by building barriers around the United States, that is not really going to solve the problem. So I think it's a result of greater education.
The U.S. Chamber of Commerce has prepared an analysis and comparison of key trade bills. International Vice President William Archie stresses the importance of comprehensive trade legislation to the business community.
I don't think there's any doubt there's going to be trade legislation. The question is going to be whether the president will sign it. There is no question also that the Special Trade Representative, Mr. Yider, and the administration has been very pleased with the efforts of Chairman Rostenkowski to get a bill, and we make this point in our document. The Senate bill is actually, in many ways, much more hard-hitting than the House bill. Very few people have understood that until just the last week, and we think this document is going to help them understand that better.
One reason the Reagan administration has taken a new tough stance on trade issues is the fact that Congress is going to pass a major trade bill this year. The issue is also expected to be an important one in the upcoming presidential campaign. For Nation's Business Today in Washington, I'm Dan Cush.
The economy is continuing to expand, and according to a survey of the nation's purchasing managers, the second quarter is off to a good start. A monthly survey of some 250 executives nationwide shows an improvement in all categories except inventories. New orders were up sharply in March, production was higher, and employment expanded for the first time in 2.5 years. The chairman of the committee that conducted the survey says the first quarter ended with a healthy, if not substantial, improvement, if economic growth, setting the stage for continued growth, will continue in the next 3 months. And this morning, there's more evidence that you just don't mess with the IRS.
We already knew that. File this next story under the nice try, but department. Coin dealer John Larry of Huntsville, Alabama, exchanged part of his inventory for U.S. currency. He then put the face value of the currency on his tax return. Well, the IRS promptly billed him for an extra $55,000 because all the coins were rare and worth a lot more than their face value. Now, Larry tried to argue in tax court that the IRS has to accept the coin's value as that's set originally by Congress. The court said, no way. The reason U.S. coins that are worth more than their face value are not money, they are property. So,
there you have it.
There you have it.
Once again. Coming up next on Nation's Business Today, a debate on the responsibility of business when it comes to plant closings.
And CEO Close-Up begins a 5-part profile of Bell South Chairman John Clendenden.
The storm that dumped record amounts of snow in the mountains of the south is pouring more rain in the northeast this morning, fueling floods that routed hundreds of people from their homes. Flood warnings are out from Maine to Massachusetts, and flood watches have been posted as far south as New York State. It is also raining in Texas and in Idaho.